everybody. This is Chief Elkin Napier. Welcome to the Circle of Brilliance. Today we begin a new topic, and that topic is emotional intelligence. And we're going to be exploring how emotional intelligence interacts with the change grid. Does the change grid have any usefulness when it comes to determining levels of emotional intelligence or helping people develop stronger emotional intelligence? Does the diagrams associated with emotional intelligence in any way overlay on the change grid? So that's what we want to be taking a close look at. Now, before we launch into it, though, I got a little text message, I guess, since that's what it was, asking me what I thought of a particular diagram. So I'll let you go ahead and unmute, Chris, if you want to go ahead and set up the little scenario here. Don't know if you're in a place where you can do that. Plus, he just joined the call, so I'm like jumping on him all at once. Yeah, Chris? Nope. Okay, so I'll read you what Chris sent over to me. So it's this idea about a hierarchy of competence. So he says, okay, send it over. I saw this and my first thought was the circle of brilliance may have some concerns about this image. So let me just pause there and just say, as you guys look at this image, we've talked about this whole idea about the adult learning model and moving from unconscious incompetence to conscious incompetence, and through the other rest of the steps. What do you guys think about this particular diagram and this idea about analysis and intuition being right or wrong? Any thoughts about this you want to throw out?
Well, I've actually used this in my D&I work over
Yeah.
the years, so I'm familiar with this. I've not seen it presented in this image, but
Right.
layers are very familiar to me.
Yeah. See, I
In
think that,
fact, I
no,
was
go
just
ahead.
going to say, in fact, one of the examples I give in explaining this model is when I learned how to ride a motorcycle. And the fact that I was unconsciously incompetent. I didn't know what I did not know about the technique of motorcycle riding. And through the lessons, formal lessons that I took, it elevated me to the point of unconscious competence. The example of learning how to lean into a curve when you're riding a motorcycle. And in fact, a woman I worked with talked about the fact that she's a horseback rider. Her boyfriend bought a motorcycle, and when she would ride on the back of it with him, she would at times put them at risk, because when he's leaning into a curve, it's a different technique than when you're riding a horse. And she said, when you're riding the horse, you're guiding the horse with the inside of your thigh. And when he would lean into a curve on the bike, she intuitively would be pushing. If he's doing a left turn, she's pushing against that with her left thigh, and he would begin to wobble on the bike. And so they had to have conversation about that.
Yeah.
But,
That's good. That's really good. That's really
yeah,
good.
yeah.
Yeah, I think this idea, this progression for adult learning is something that we've all had our experiences with. And as we apply this on the change grid, you guys will remember that I said if we bring it up just as the 4 quadrants, which background do I want to use? Yeah, we'll use this one. That people would move from being an unconscious incompetent, which is the in-grid side of things, so they don't perceive any challenge because they're unconscious, and they don't really have any ability, hence they are incompetent around that. Well, they don't know what they don't know. There's kind of like an oblivious sort of bliss that comes along with that. And so they just, go through their day. Well, something happens and suddenly they become conscious and they become aware of the fact that they don't need something that for whatever reasons now is showing itself to be very important or one way or another valuable, whatever the scenario happens to be. And so suddenly the perceived challenge goes up, the perceived ability continues to be low. So we can say that the unconscious incompetent lives in grid, that conscious incompetent lives up grid. So what happens between conscious incompetence and conscious competence? So what's changing?
The level of ability.
Right. And so ability is going up And so that's moving us from upgrid to outgrid. So outgrid is the domain of the conscious competent. So they are actively, some of it is learning, some of it is applying, but it's very conscious, it's very active, it's very logical, deliberate, intentional, all those good sorts of things that come along with that. But as time goes on and we continue to do these things, they become more and more automatic. And so what's happening now, I mean, ability is staying high. So what's really changing? The perceived level of
Challenge.
challenge. It's just not challenging anymore. I figured it out long ago. I know how to do it. I can do it on autopilot. I don't even need to be aware. And, you know, using another driving example, I've often said that when you first sit behind the wheel of a car, um, you know, it moves, it's got all these buttons and knobs and wheels and all this kind of stuff. I learned to drive on a stick shift, so my car was like jerking and stalling out and all that kind of stuff. Well, now you get behind the wheel of a car after many years of driving, and you often arrive at your destination with no recollection of the journey. And so, you know, your driving has become kind of an automatic thing. And so as we've chatted about this before, we've certainly said, well, for a great many things, that progression holds true. You move from being an unconscious incompetent up to the conscious incompetent, then conscious competent outgrid, and ultimately you chill down to the unconscious competent down there. And for a lot of things that you do, that's the destination. You end up down in the downgrid quadrant. What do you think the problem is? Going back to Tim's example of riding a motorcycle, what do you think the problem is with going from being a conscious competent motorcycle rider to an unconscious competent motorcycle rider? So we'll say there's good parts to that. There's also some bad parts to that. So what do you think?
You go riding in the rain.
Blind spots.
Yeah, well, go riding in the rain. Is this personal experience talking?
A friend of mine, he went riding in the rain. He's a great rider, but he always thought he was excellent at it until he had an accident during a rainy day.
Yeah. And so, yeah, part of the good part is that you can do a lot of things very automatically, like I think Tim was talking about, knowing how to lean into a curve. It's the same thing on a bicycle. They say you really never forget how to ride a bicycle, and that's you know, certainly held true for us. I mean, a great many decades passed between our prior bicycle riding and our next bicycle ride, but we seem to be just fine. No one was falling off of the thing. Nevertheless, you had to pay a little bit closer attention to what was going on and all that. So I do think there's a benefit to it, but the downside is that, and I think David, you just said it.
Oh, well, you know, you just become careless.
Yeah, you stop.
You start riding in people's blind spots. You start passing on the right. You start doing things that are unsafe.
And you begin operating, if we look at control for a second, as you move into power apathy, you now could be suffering from an assumption of control, and ultimately down in apathy, an illusion of control.
Right.
And so that's part of the problem, is that you're not paying attention as closely as you once did. You're assuming a whole lot of things are going to stay consistent, and these could end up causing you to make careless mistakes, miss important pieces of information. I mean, seriously, how often in your lifetime have you guys passed your exit while you were driving on a longer drive? You just went like, how did I miss that? Where was I when I drove past it? You know, so you know, you just stop paying attention to the details.
Can I ask a question, T?
Please do, please do.
I get, of course, the process for the bottom going up to unconscious competence. That's pretty okay. I'm just wondering about the slide that you shared where it says wrong and right.
Yeah,
intuition.
I want to get back to
that. Is that possible? I mean, maybe we need to define intuition, but I would say intuition is always good, but then I guess it depends on your definition. So maybe it's good if we first define what we mean.
Right. And you know, Dragon, what's interesting is that when Chris sent that diagram over, I went on a deep search for that diagram online, hoping that one of the image references would take me back to the original article where that would be explained. And so far, I've had no luck finding any source that explains this whole idea. Edie, your hand is up. Did you have something you want to throw in now? Okay, well,
You know
there
what?
you
I'm just pressing buttons, honey.
go. Okay, fine. Okay, but again, just to finish off our overlay of that adult learning model, what we did say is that another big problem is that a great many times in life, what we think we have mastered may very well be true in that moment, but that thing that we have mastered is not static. It's going to continue to change. Unfortunately, because we're so far downgraded, because we are now unconscious yet again, we don't notice the changes that are taking place. And so we don't adapt to them. And that means sooner or later, we may very well find ourselves to yet again be an unconscious incompetent. Now, if I wanted to be really strict about it, I'd say, yeah, but we're an unconscious incompetent about a variation on what we achieved unconscious competence around. And I think that's a fair thing to say. But nevertheless, if we are looking at this model for unconscious competence, you will find every time I've looked, I've not seen anything that says anything different than what I'm about to share. They believe that's a destination, that it's a linear progression. And once you reach unconscious competence, there you are set forever. And I've always taken issue with that because as a human, you're changing, circumstances are changing, expectations may very well be changing. And that means the behavior that was once evidence of mastery may now be evidence of old school, vintage kind of historical ways that we did something way back when. So anyway, I'll just be quiet and let you guys comment on that. So are you in agreement that some things, if it's a one-way linear kind of a thing, you're going to end up in apathy and it's got its own set of problems. But other things are going to continue to modify and change. And if you're downgrade, you're not really noticing those things. Thoughts about that?
Yeah. The context, Edie probably can speak to this more than myself, but to me, the context always has a major role to play with behavior. So I have a hard time with those words. If this is really a learning model that we're talking about, how is it wrong to experience intuition in whatever moment it is? I was always taught to welcome all moments, both unwelcome and welcome.
Right.
Like they have something to teach you. That's what my Sifu and martial artists always say, any given moment, welcome and unwelcome, has something to teach you. So how can intuition, something that at least for me, tends to come holistically,
yes,
how can it be wrong?
Right.
Like that's a strong word.
Yeah, I agree. Which gets to these, go right ahead, Kathy.
Yeah, I was going to say, my comment here is that notion of hierarchy, pyramidal hierarchy, which I have seen and used throughout my career for culture, for this, for that, it is no longer relevant. That people have learned to think more systemically, as the ChangeGrid does intuitively anyway, to use intuition. And that this notion of a pyramidal hierarchy just doesn't work anymore for most things. And so I think that, your comment about we're constantly moving based on context and situation and history and learning and everything else. Among all these things, I like the categories, but the way they're placed there, I think is not appropriate, and it makes more sense to talk about them the way the ChangeGrid does. So that's my 2 cents there on that.
Thank you. All right. Well, has anybody ever seen this whole right-wrong analysis intuition thing?
No.
Or is that's news to everybody? I've never seen it before.
No,
I haven't either. I love it.
Now, tell us what you love about it, because I think it's hogwash.
Really?
Oh, I think it's nonsense. I think it's absolute drivel.
Okay, tell me why you think it's nonsense.
Because it implies that at the heart of unconscious incompetence is that your intuition is faulty. Then it says that if you are an unconscious competent, your intuition is right. And so going back to what Dragon said, the question is, how are they defining intuition and analysis? And that's what I was trying to find. I cannot find, if you do an image search for competence, competency, anything like that, you will find this diagram used in dozens of locations across the internet. But so far, I haven't clicked on one yet that took me any place that defined what they meant, whoever designed this diagram meant by the words intuition and analysis. And so that leaves us in the situation where we have to do, you guys remember transderivational search? Remember what transderivational search is, anybody? Okay,
I don't.
transderivational search comes from I don't know where it originally came from, but I learned about it when I was studying neurolinguistic programming. They said that transderivational search is the process by which our brain assigns meaning to the variety of stimuli we encounter. And so, for example, it's going to go back to our knowledge, our experience, all those kinds of things. It's going to do that. So if I said to you, yesterday I had an accident. Now you have no specific information whatsoever, but that has not stopped your brain from trying to add meaning to the words I just used. That process is transderivational search, where you go digging through all of your life's knowledge, your understandings, your experience, and you try to find meaning to match whatever that's going on. Questions about that? Thoughts about that? Transderivational search?
I think we do
No, it's
that
clear.
with everything.
Well, yeah, that's what the whole point in neurolinguistic programming is saying. That's the way your brain works. It's always trying to understand any and all stimuli that it encounters. And how can it do that? So, absence the receipt of additional information, it's going to do its very best to try to explain for itself, understand for itself what's really going on. And in fact, if you think about it, this goes to Tim's work. This probably is very much involved in the world of bias, because we're encountering a stimuli, a stimulants, and we have to add meaning to it. So, yeah.
But isn't that true? Like yeah,
Yeah,
say
no,
what you're
I
going
was
to
gonna
say,
say, go
Peter.
ahead, Abe.
You go ahead.
Yeah, Tim and then Edie.
No, I was just going to say that, and then from the psychological perspective, the brain does the mental association to fill in those gaps of unknown.
The brain hates a vacuum. It hates a question mark. So if I
Yes.
said to you right now, what color was your first bicycle? I can go on to talk about anything, but by now your brain is attempted to answer the question, what color was your first bicycle? It hates a void. It hates a vacuum. It wants to do whatever it can do to add meaning to whatever it is that you've encountered. And it was really interesting, in fact, and then Tim, I want you to comment on what I'm about to share, but I was just flipping through Facebook this morning, and I saw one of those things where it says, here's 20 examples of situations where your assumptions would have led you astray. And there was this one little photograph of this guy who is solid tattoos and piercings and grubby clothes and big doc. I forget the doc. He makes these boots that certain subcultures wear a great deal. And, his hair is all mohawky and all this kind of stuff. And there's this little old gal, and she's trying to carry two relatively heavy sorts of packages. And he walks up to her and takes the two packages. And then the question was, what was your immediate assumption? And was your immediate assumption he's going to try to rob her, or that he's trying to help her? But then they show you the next little picture as the sequence goes on, and he was just trying to help her get up the steps with her packages. So, and then she gives him a big hug and whatever the case may be. And it's like, this is the whole idea. Our brain encounters something we don't know the whole story around. We see this guy dressed in all this alternative sort of way, and this little old gal. And what happens? We immediately make some sort of decision. So I'll throw it back to you guys. Do you believe that that routinely happens, that we are all, that's part of how we all operate? Why do we operate that way? How is that good? How is that bad? Anybody want to throw in?
Well, Malcolm Gladwell calls it thin slicing, I believe, in his book, Blink, where the brain takes those shortcuts. And he says, it's the analogy of quack like a duck, was it really a duck? And so he said, sometimes we make those quick assumptions and we're correct. But the question is, well, when we are incorrect, what's the impact, right? When we make those assumptions, it can have an impact on folks that from the D&I space makes them then begin to feel that they're not being included and that they're in some marginalized group.
Yeah. Other comments?
I think you're just
But all your life experiences are what I think contributes to that perception at that moment. Don't you agree? I mean, I'm just thinking my first job, my job in New York City in a children's psych hospital, I got knocked out the first day because touch to that person, when he was touched, he was abused, and it was a kind touch. And so isn't it, assessing perceiving? Yeah. That at that moment,
these are all learned associations. These are all, even transderivational search. As a definition includes the learned association between an external stimulus and an internal response. Now, okay, David, what were you about to say?
I was going to say it's a survival instinct. It's neural pathways. It's the sensory input that happens so quickly that you have to catch yourself if you're going to respond differently.
Yeah, and see, this is the question I had about why does the brain do this? And my thought, of course, is that, well, the brain has to do because there's something very primal happening. And at a primal level, we need to be able to very quickly assess and respond to anything we might perceive as threatening. Now, how we learned that people who dress in an alternative way represent a threat to us, that there could be hours of discussions around that. Is it because of the way that they've been depicted in the media or movies that we've seen or stories that we've read? Or is it also just that we have a natural, and I'm talking about a primal drive, if you will, or a primal tendency to fear things we have not seen before?
Exactly. It's not familiar. It's the familiar. Don't you think?
I think.
Yeah.
I
But
agree.
think about our sensory responses and things that David was just describing from a neuroscience perspective. The brain's first order business is all about preserving and conserving energy. So these sensory kinds of neuroscience, we call it an app, an association, a pattern, or a process that's strong synaptically. So the brain doesn't have to figure it out. So you made the association. And so anything that's outside of that in terms of interoception is going to be seen as, different. It's going to trigger the amygdala, so the whole fight or flight response.
It's a threat.
And so it's a threat. And so if you don't have that, and that's for anything.
Yeah, let me just chime one thing in. It is a threat until it proves itself otherwise.
Exactly.
I think that's what we're talking about. Now we're familiar with it, it's okay. So let me just throw one quick example in here. One of the ways that we can tell that someone is new to living in the desert is that they think that we should be afraid of coyotes. And once you live here for a very short period of time, you quickly learn that coyotes have absolutely no interest in humans whatsoever. They are interested in your little dogs, but they're not interested in you. And so we could go walking around and there could be coyotes crossing our path. The coyote is more afraid of us than we should be afraid of them. But if you're brand new here and you see a coyote, what do you think? it's immediate. Everyone's all reacting like, how do we get rid of these animals? It's kind of like, oh, I don't know. This is their desert. So good luck with that. But anyway, go ahead.
That's exactly right.
So,
and that becomes part of the learning process, right?
Right, which now requires us to relearn something, which now gets back to Tim's work. So Tim, if you'll unmute for a second, if you could try. Yeah, go ahead, Dragon.
I was just looking at my email. I don't have anything. What on this in there?
Oh, wait just a second. I'm hearing something in the background. Okay, but that's my question. So Tim, are you in a place where you can unmute?
Sure.
Yeah, there you go. So I guess we need to just understand a little bit with what's going on in our society right now and all that. How do you go about changing those anchors, changing those established patterns? So,
well, one of the things we encourage folks to do is to get uncomfortable, right? And to actually challenge the idea of, the fear of the unknown, particularly as it relates to folks you don't know, you don't necessarily have anything in common with. We do trust models where we ask individuals to list, I don't know, 6 or 7 folks that you trust. They do that, but the rule is it cannot be a family member. So it's all in the context of the workplace. And then once they've created their list, we give them diversity demographics, race, gender, et cetera, and ask them to codify that list of names. And to hear their analysis of that list really begins to reveal, where their comfort level is. And so we then go into conversation around, well, what can you do to make that list look different and include folks that are different from you?
Interesting. Now, in what you've just said, I heard that it's contextual. So you got family things to deal with, you got whatever, because here's the thing I'm always wondering about. I know that particularly when I'm in another country, if I am walking out and about alone, I don't care if it's daytime, nighttime, obviously it's even worse at the nighttime, I have a tendency to cross to the other side of the street if I'm approaching any sort of stranger. It doesn't matter what they look like, none of that matters. I don't want to be near anyone that I don't know when I'm alone in an unfamiliar area. So if I'm doing that, am I just doing what a human does for the sake of survival, or am I some way doing something that is, I don't know, morally, ethically wrong based on the discussions we're all having today about changing all that? So,
well, that's what's interesting about it, T, because, with what you just said and what David and Brian had mentioned around the idea of being safe. Right. So when we're trying to have this conversation in the D&I workspace, folks will offer examples like what you just said and say, well, am I wrong for wanting to make sure that I'm safe? Are you saying to me that I should gladly approach a group of guys in a dark alley who are carrying chains and bats?
Yeah.
Right.
Yeah.
And so the fear of engaging in the D&I conversation, they pull it away to a conversation that's not relevant to what we're talking about.
All right. And so that was my actual question is, no one is expecting anybody to set aside whatever their instinctual sorts of fears are in situations where they really could be threatened. But if you're talking about in the workplace, you're just talking about, general life. That's a very different sort of a thing. So, okay. All right. Well, all very interesting kind of stuff. We're now a half hour into our call and haven't even got into the subject of the call. So I may need to relabel this one, but I got to get back to this intuition analysis stuff, because all this started because of transderivational search, adding meaning to stimuli we encounter. When you guys see the words analysis and intuition, and you see the way they're trying to connect them to conscious and unconscious, competence, incompetence, can you make any kind of meaningful connection to these with these?
I can comment here. I think it is a value judgment. And I think that this is what I'm seeing, and I'd love to hear what other people have to say. there's the dichotomy of analysis versus intuition, particularly in the business world. You know, analysis versus intuition, right brain, left brain, different. And there is the sense of, as you move up the hierarchy here, you're right as you move up toward the top. So, you know, so there's the right thing to do, there's the better thing to do, there's all of that. I think this was not particularly well founded in data or theory or analysis. I think it was simply a way for I don't know, to create that sense of hierarchy, and also to lay bare that notion that that analysis and intuition are completely different things. And I've come to believe that they're not. I certainly understand the difference, but I'd be very interested to hear what other people who are neuroscientists have to say about my comment.
Yeah, I think there's a lot of validity in what you just said, because when intuition comes, as I say, from my perspective, you're working with a perceiving power, right? Perceiving powers in terms of locale, where it's processed in the brain. You're talking about something that requires your attention. So now you have the attentional faculties involved, and you're making an analysis, right? So it's kind of like when you hear people talk about things that are instinctive. Over time, as they do what Tim said, they're not resisting, they're using that data, information, the momentum to learn. So things that were once instinctive now become distinctive through the experience. And so to me, this all together is not like a hierarchy, as it is more of like what we were talking about with the spiral dynamics. So you become more integrated in your understanding, more integrated through these experiences that changes the whole structure, the whole synaptic structure, where you're creating new structures. Some of these more dominant structures now become less dominant. It's a whole, like, I think I heard the word system. It's a whole system at play there. So I don't get like the whole hierarchy thing, and kind of like a set it and forget it and you're done. I don't understand it. I'm having a hard time trying to figure that out.
You know, the part of it that I could make a connection and probably build a case for, I really do believe that humans have the ability to rationalize any two totally unrelated things and draw some sort of connection between them. But I noticed that the word analysis aligns with the word conscious, and intuition aligns with unconscious as you work your way through these four things. So would I say that when you are in that conscious incompetence or conscious competence, your analytical faculties are probably more active? Is there more activity in that? Would you guys kind of say, well, I could probably see that?
I can see that, but there'll still be a gap somewhat of a gap between the subjective perception of what could create value and the objective reality of what would create value. So to be so in other words, whenever the way the brain puts together sensory it's almost like this digitized image that we're looking at. So it's never really complete. It's just complete in that moment, right? It's almost like the equivalent of so-called breaking news, right? They're getting it out quick, and some more facts come out, so they have to break the story again.
Yep.
That's how we see things. We never really have the complete picture. We have our picture. I think it was Anais Nin that said we tend not to see things as they are. We see things as we are.
Yes. Yep.
I think that applies here.
I think so as well. That's why it's like, well, I could make a connection between analysis and consciousness, because what is consciousness if it isn't a level of awareness, a level of observation, a level of logical processing? I mean, what is consciousness? It's, we probably say, how do you define it? And one of the definitions would probably be that you are aware of the fact that you are paying attention to certain things, or that you are who you are, where you are, whatever it is. So I get it. I can kind of feel there's this analysis element to it. I don't understand the right or wrong stuff. And similarly, intuition, I get it. Okay, if you are unconscious, well, then certainly that would imply that you're not doing a whole lot of deliberate analysis. But the thought that when you are unconscious, or you are just downgrid, period, that there is no analysis occurring, that it's all intuition, I think that's absolute nonsense. So, I mean, my brain is always trying to figure things out. And if it can.
But isn't that kind of, T, like when you're in the flow, that consciousness and analysis are almost an interruption to the flow? I see this more as a continuum. You know what I mean?
Yeah, if I look though at flow psychology, right along that travels along the heart line, that would travel right through, on the one side, unconscious incompetence, and on the other side, conscious competence. So even then, it would be implying that for me to really develop a powerful conscious competence, I need to be outgrid. I need to be doing whatever it is I need to do to learn, to practice, to figure out, to plot and plan, and whatever it happens to be. I completely get that. So flow, in any measurable level, would be conscious competence. So, yeah. So I guess I don't know that we're going to resolve any of this, but I will just say to you that because it is so easily found as an image search, that means that a lot of people have either got an understanding that none of us do, or have just kind of used this diagram because they didn't want to draw their own. And so it's more like they're continuing to repeat and propagate information that is incomplete and perhaps inaccurate. So yeah, I don't know.
Question, T.
I see that all the time. I see that all the time, that people just use stuff because it's handy and they don't give it a lot of thought, but it gives them a framework. If they're teaching something, they're just being lazy about either, or unable to create their own or to do the research themselves. It's like, oh, this looks good. Let me use this because it's a tool that I can use to get my point across in this particular training class or in this presentation. And I think it just happens all the time. I see it all the time with all kinds of things.
Yep. Okay, I'm getting some things in chat just as a reminder to everybody. If you want everyone to see it, make sure you're chatting to panelists and, is it participants? Is that what it says? And attendees, make sure you choose that. Otherwise, let's see, Brian, you've just been very complimented by Tim, but it came to me instead of everybody. So just so you know.
Thank you for that, T.
Yeah,
I had a question for you. Would these 4 layers also be found in the danger zone?
I would say to you that there is a danger zone expression of each of these 4.
Yeah.
So if we're going through these processes, just one second, let me go to a different diagram. By the way, just so you guys know, at the end of this call, I've got to re-record my opening. So hi everybody, because this is a totally different subject. So I love it. Okay, got the center of the change grid. Well, what if I go from being an unconscious incompetent, but I'm right here on the change grid. I'm at 5-5 or 4-4. I'm not over here at 0-0. But, I don't know what I don't know. Who knows? I might know more than I even think I know, but I don't know because I'm not paying any attention to it because, I'm unconscious. So I don't know where I'm starting from, but maybe, just maybe, I'm starting, over here somewhere. Well, then I become conscious of it, and maybe I don't need that awareness that I don't know something to be so severe that it skyrockets me all the way up to a challenge of 10, 11, 12. Maybe it just goes like, oh, I should figure that out. So it's more like a 7 on the challenge scale. And then when I go For the ability, well, I don't need to achieve absolute mastery over it. I don't need my ability to be at 10, 11, 12. I just need it to be, better than it is right now. And then I move down grid a little bit because I got a little bit better at it, but I'm not going to get down into power apathy and apathy around the whole thing. So it'd be interesting for us to find personal examples of that happening, but I'm sure it's happened plenty of times. So for example, I can give you one real quick one. Linda and I are in the process of reupholstering every bit of our outdoor furniture. And we ordered enough fabric to make a new umbrella, a new patio umbrella. And we've never done that before. We've never sewn a patio umbrella. We don't have a pattern. We don't have anything like that. But so if I said, are we competent to do that? I'd say, well, I've sewn plenty of straight lines in my life. I think it's all straight lines. I can probably figure it out. So, but nevertheless, there's some things to figure out, but the challenge isn't one that's stressing us out, but it's up there. And what do I need to figure out? I don't need to figure out how to make an expert precision umbrella. I just want it to be good enough. And so I can mellow out around the whole thing because I figured it out, but none of it's mastery, none of it's all that. So to me, that's kind of a middle of the grid sort of a developmental sort of a thing. So, you don't have all that much value attached to the outcome, but you're not clueless to begin with, and on and on. So, I mean, how much of life do we kind of live there? So it's all good enough, but to the other extreme, are there a danger zone? Are there things, is it possible for someone to be an unconscious incompetent to the point of absolute cluelessness, obliviousness to what's going on? They know nothing, they have nothing at all. There they are, as far in-grid as in-grid could possibly be. I often wonder how, on this planet, there are still populations of humans who are living the way they were living hundreds, if not thousands of years ago, have no idea how life is lived elsewhere because they're very, very isolated. Nevertheless, they seem to be doing just fine for themselves and they seem to be very happy and all that sort of a thing. Well, good grief. If an airplane flew overhead, why do I think that might actually move them way up to the upgrade danger zone? They don't know what that beast is. They don't know what that bird is. They have no idea what's going on. So I think we're going to get a very threatened response from them. Are you guys with me on this so far?
Yes.
Yeah.
Yep.
Now, I believe such populations should be left alone. But if someone said, oh, no, we need to turn them into aerospace engineers, in order for them to be truly, truly competent, well, that to me is a situation of what that outgrid danger zone conscious competence looks like. It's when you're going after challenges and applying ability that probably exceeds whatever is really necessary, worthwhile in the actual truth of the situation. So fighting battles that don't need to be fought. Arguing purely for the sake of arguing, controlling people in situations who do not need to be controlled. Nevertheless, that outgrid conscious competence has this superiority sort of element that comes along with it, and this desire to be, the supreme ruler of whatever it is that's going on. And then, of course, there are people who can end up in the downgrid danger zone, unconscious competence. We've already talked about that leads to someone completely disconnecting with the fact that the world continues to change. And so they're, and by the way, they may also present themselves as a know-it-all, but they're not trying to do it intentionally to conquer and control. They're just, if it comes up, they don't mind telling you that you don't know squat and they know everything. So that might still be going on. So I do believe that each of these four learning styles has its own danger to it. So we can be real tight to the middle, or we can be way to the extremes, but in all likelihood, we're just someplace in between, meandering around and around and around as we live this thing called life. Yep. Okay, thoughts about that? Questions? Comments? All right. Well, we only have a few minutes left, so rather than jump into the topic in earnest, I just wanted to take a moment and show you guys the slides that I want to be going over next time around. And so I put up the definition of emotional intelligence. This is one out of a dictionary. Um, Similar to mindfulness, as I started researching source material for emotional intelligence, I found that there are multiple people who lay claim to or give credit to for the birth, if you will, of emotional intelligence as subject matter. And one of those names you'll see a lot is Goleman. And there's another one that escapes me at the moment, but nevertheless, it seems that Goldman produced the most diagrams that we can actually play with. So I'd be very open to you guys looking for other definitions for emotional intelligence and for any kinds of diagrams that represent the model, the key points made by the model, that sort of a thing. There are many tests you can take to establish your current level of emotional intelligence. And but it's really interesting as you go researching it, you're going to find this one thing. I actually had to laugh when I saw it. One says it was three little postings, and the one posting's title is "The Three Key Elements of Emotional Intelligence," and the next one, right down the Google kind of list, is "The Four Key Elements of Emotional Intelligence," and then the next one below, "The Five Key Elements of Emotional Intelligence." So obviously someone started the whole thing and they had their core model, and then a lot of people have come along and tried to apply it to different things. It gave rise to different illustrations, or tried to, do whatever it is they try to do, just like I'd like to see if it can be overlaid on a change grid. So so there you go. But this one diagram, and you guys can easily find this if you just do a Google search for Goleman emotional intelligence and click on the images tab in your Google search, you will find this in many, many, many different design representations, but it's pretty much the same content. So basically, on the left side of things, it's recognition versus regulation, and up top, self versus social. So I think it's interesting when you go, well, does self-recognition overlay on a particular quadrant? Does social recognition overlay? Does self-management, does relationship management, where might these things overlay? And if they do overlay, and that's still a giant if they do overlay, do they stretch to all four corners? Are they confined to just a certain region of the change grid? Are there danger zones that might be associated with self-awareness at an extreme? What might that be like? I mean, if we're talking about emotional intelligence, what's the opposite? Emotional unintelligence? I don't think that's a word. So is that emotional cluelessness, emotional stupidity? I don't know. But is it possible for someone to become so transfixed on self-awareness at the expense of anything on the others that it becomes problematic? Or social awareness, or relationship management, or self-management? Are there extremes that one might encounter? I suspect there are. Otherwise, I don't know what the point is of what the test is trying to reveal. So I'm going to imagine, and I've never seen the results of an emotional intelligence test. So if you guys have access to anything, I'd love for them to be shared. But I kind of question, or I would not be surprised to find out that it's a scatter diagram that shows that you have got, instead of being balanced across all four of these, that you are leaning more heavily towards one, or you have a deficit in another. And so it might end up looking like one of those blob diagrams that we often see, or it might have specific points that are scattered, like kind of like I'm trying to think of one that's actually done that, but they're looking at a lot of parameters and saying, you plot here, you plot here, you plot here. Or maybe that's what it looks like when you're plotting a team for emotional intelligence. Now, we do have a few people inside of our community that are rather experts at emotional intelligence, that have it as the foundation of their practice. And so I'm going to reach out to them and see if they'd like to join in, just to be that expert on the subject matter, because I want want to make sure we give it all the credit we can give it. And by the way, I'm totally perplexed by these arrows. So we're kind of going like from self-awareness, I can move either way and then end up in relationship management sooner or later. So I don't know.
Yeah, I remember taking I had to take that test, but I don't remember what the test looked like in terms of results. I remember it said something about I had a strong social awareness aspect, which in fact, I think it was more social awareness than the self-management, which I was quite surprised by. But I don't remember why. But the whole premise was that this idea of self-awareness is the cornerstone, because if you're aware of your own emotions, you're at least positioned to regulate them. And if you understand your emotions, then other people's emotions, then you can move into some of those other areas. I remember it going something like that.
Yeah.
This is back in 2001 or something.
Yeah.
So it's been a while.
Yeah. I've done a pretty deep dive into this stuff over the years, from when it first came out, Goleman and then Richard Boyatzis, and there's, other people have done work with this at Harvard and other places, Case Western and other places. But emo-comp, as they call it in the business, is something that I've had to study a lot as part of leadership development, and certainly creating competency models for leaders, because emotional intelligence always became a cornerstone for competence for leaders moving forward. And Brian's right. I mean, that notion of, I wouldn't call myself an expert, because I just haven't taken the time in the last 30 years or whenever it came out to stay up to date on what's been going on. But I have all that, I've studied it and familiar with it and worked with it. But self-awareness is the cornerstone. It comes with that idea of the PowerPoint notion, that you have to start that without an awareness of who you are and knowing yourself, that it's impossible then to self-manage, which is one of the next levels of emotional competence, where you're actually able to start regulating how you operate and how you act, or to become socially aware, social awareness of others. So it's that notion. It's almost like the equivalent of the PowerPoint, and to some degree. I'm not saying that's it, but it's that notion of starting with self and awareness and going from there.
Yeah.
Is he a psychologist, Goleman?
Yeah, Goleman's a psychologist. Yeah.
Okay.
Yeah, well, I've just been doing some little scrolling about, and it's very interesting to me that positivepsychology.com has a list of 17 different emotional intelligence tests you can take.
Yeah, that's what is his name? I forget, the professor from Penn University. He has value, all different kinds of assessments. That's how he gets his research.
Well, the father of positive psychology is Seligman.
Yeah,
Right.
that's it. Yeah,
Right.
that's his.
Right.
Yeah.
Right.
All right, so this is the closest to a test result I've found. Jane Doe, she takes so many of these tests and gets herself into so much trouble. But nevertheless, I don't know why people hire her. Anyway, so you can see apparently they break each one of these 5 categories into 3 main areas of deeper exploration, and then you get scored, probably based on how often you choose whatever answer you do. But then you end up with an overall score, 126 out of 130. How do you get that? Because if I look at all these gaps at the end of the main summaries, oh, I see, it's about the same. Yeah. Yeah. So, okay. Very interesting. I still don't see how it works, but okay, yay. All right. Anyway, so I have a bunch of different diagrams that I've been able to find. And it's interesting to me. I want to slide one more in just for a second. It's a pretty small one, but people are trying to depict this in so many different ways, but it all ends up being, okay, emotional and social functioning performance, emotional and social functioning performance. I have no idea. Yeah. All right. Anyway, there you go.
Is there a layer for the change? I know there's an adjective map, but is there, did you have an emotional map or layer or something to that
Well,
extent?
in fact, yeah, a great many of the adjectives are emotions.
Okay, I got you.
So you can find where does confidence live? Where does, shame live? Where does, all these different variations on emotions. So some of that's on the adjective map, but we've never actually just done a pure emotion map. And we talked about it years and years ago. And one of the reasons is because there was a lack of clarity around what exactly is an emotion. So, because people want to put up things like that cold was an emotion, that you were behaving in a cold manner towards another person, and that was an emotion. I just kind of went like, cold is a description of a behavior.
Right,
It's an
right,
adjective describing how you might be interacting with somebody, but I don't know that cold is an emotion. Now, there must be an emotion that's underlying that individual's choice of behavior to be cold to
right,
someone else.
right.
Um,
Now the neuroscience, the behavioral scientists that used to come to the lab all the time, they say what they study isn't what we call feeling. So the good, bad, those kinds of things. From the behavioral science, they study the triggers. So, and moto literally in Latin means movement. So they're studying what triggered this behavior that is being expressed. They said they don't study what we call feelings. I remember that, quite vividly.
yeah, and I think that for a lot of people, there's a difference. No, for a lot of people, there is no difference between emotion and feeling.
Mm-hmm.
And I think there's definitely,
Mm-hmm.
Now there might be some feelings that are also emotions and some emotions that are also feelings. I mean, I think about love. Where does love go? Is love an emotion? Is love a feeling? Is love a bit of both? I don't know. So anyway, but that's the long answer to your short question. We thought about creating an emotion map, but we ended up running into a number of problems with defining what the emotions are. We even asked for someone who was a clinical psychologist, now that I'm thinking about it, if they had a resource of a list of all clinically recognized emotions. And lo and behold, they did have something that would fall into that category. And we looked at it all and went like, a lot of these aren't emotions. These are feelings. These are feelings.
Interesting.
So, yeah.
I have an emotional competence map. I don't know if I can put my hands on it anymore, but that was used in training people in emotional competence. That was actually quite illustrative and fun. If I can put my hands on it, I'll scan it and send it over to you, T.
Yeah, please do, because I love these kinds of maps. I'm just typed in emotional competence map, looking at images.
I didn't even know such a thing existed.
You'd be surprised what exists when you get out there. Oh, what is this one? How big are you? Oh, you're big enough to show. One moment, everybody. This will be our little last thing for today, but worth clicking on. Someone decided to draw cartoons. Just got to give them their due for that. Emotional intelligence. Now, I don't see any emotions. Huh. That's very interesting to me. How can emotional intelligence not make mention of emotions? But okay, so be it. I'll keep this one for later week. Self-awareness, empathy, self-regulation, social skills, motivation. Yeah, those are the 5.
The one that I have, T, has a bunch of little facial expressions.
Yeah.
And you can put it up on your refrigerator. And so what my husband and I would do would be to to sort of move the little magnet to how we felt that day.
Oh, I love it.
I mean, it was just a joke, but it's used we used to use it in emotional intelligence training. So, I mean, it is about, how are you feeling right now as part of the self-awareness of getting in touch with your feelings.
Sure, sure.
Yeah.
Well, and I love that. You could just look at the refrigerator and decide if you just need to give somebody space today. Yeah, there you go. I love it. I love it. Okay, well, anyway, that's the puzzle we'd like to start to dive into more deeply on Tuesday's call. So, oh yeah, Tuesday. So everybody have a wonderful Memorial Day weekend, or Dragon, you may enjoy the U.S.'s Memorial Day. All you have to do is have a hamburger.
Okay.
A picnic is good. And just so, I don't know if you know what Memorial Day is, but it's the day that we remember people who have passed away from their military service. So it tends to have a lot of military sorts of things that happen as well. Although I think for most people, it's a long weekend with a picnic involved, or with a cookout. Yeah, maybe a parade. Okay, anyway, talk to you guys on Tuesday. Bye for now.
Thank you.
Bye-bye. Thank you. Bye-bye.